In this video I'm going to talk about where is the best place to site new agricultural buildings from both a practical and a planning perspective. So we quite frequently get asked the question, which is, where will the planners like us to site a new agricultural building? So our advice generally is, don't let the tail wag the dog. Start out with where you need your building from a practical perspective, because you don't want to be going back and changing it or actually living with it for 20 years when it's not really working where you put it. So start where you need it from a practical perspective, and truthfully 8 out of 10 times that's probably the location which the planners will be happy with anyway. So when you are putting up a new agricultural building, there are several things to think about, and I will run through those. Some of them are planning and some of them are practical. So I'm going to give you an example. So this site we're on now, we have put up so far 2 cattle sheds, and there's a third one going up, 1 general purpose building, and there's another one going up shortly. And the things that we considered in that were, when it was a brand new greenfield site, we just looked at where sensibly was sort of the flattest, the levelest part of the site. So look at the topography and look at where it's sensible to go. Probably go nearer hedges, go up against hedges, rather than probably being right in the middle of the field. After that, and once you've got an established yard, the positioning, it relates to the other buildings, of course. So you generally try to keep buildings together. Don't squeeze them in too tight. Make sure you give yourself plenty of room for tractors and trailers and moving around, but generally keep them roughly in the same sort of part of the yard or the field. One of the next things that we considered was the general sort of visual impact, because obviously some of the buildings are really quite large, and how is that going to be viewed from different angles. At this particular site, 3 of the angles there was no visibility because of hedges and just the lie of the land, but from one angle there was quite a view down from the lane into the site, so we considered if there was a way of mitigating that, or if we could colour the roof a certain colour just to reduce the visual impact on it. One of the next things that you have to consider is access. Can you get safe access into the site? And if you already have an existing access, that's probably okay. One of the next things you've got to just remember is give yourself enough room for expansion and growth. There's nothing worse than sort of cramming in and then business is going really well, and in 5 or 10 years time you suddenly want to add to your buildings and now there's not enough room to do so. Consider your costs from a practical point of view. Obviously the least sort of earthworks you can do, groundworks you can do, that reduces your cost. Utilities, how far have you got to get water or electric to your site or to your building, and obviously reducing that. So the last thing to say is just be sort of thoughtful or mindful about where your neighbours are and the impact on them. Whilst I know sometimes it can be game to wind up neighbours, the path of least resistance from a planning point of view is to be mindful of your neighbours and just keep it out of the way wherever possible. So there's a few more handy hints for you, just thinking about getting planning for buildings and how you decide to site them. As I said before, leave enough room, don't squeeze it in, make sure that you can move a big tractor and trailer and so on around the site. Make sure that you're not putting it across, or preferably not adjacent to a public rights of way like a footpath or a bridle path. And if you have a greenfield site and are thinking about how to group buildings, my recommendation from a practical point of view is to group types of buildings. So you would put, for example, a grain shed away from contaminants such as a muck or a slurry store. And so if you're on a greenfield site and thinking where to start, group your buildings for type or for use, and also for things like your farm assurance and so on. Other issues the planners will want to consider are flooding. You just have to make sure, ideally, that it's out of any flood risk zones. Is the highway safely accessible? Where you've got an existing yard, it's probably okay, but if you're building a new greenfield site, obviously you need to choose access onto the road where it is safest. They will occasionally look at the landscape impact. This is particularly important if you're in something like an area of outstanding natural beauty, and also any sort of designations such as proximity to listed buildings or something along those lines. And again, just to reiterate, the neighbouring amenity impact, try and reduce that wherever possible, and that is the path of least resistance to getting a successful planning consent.